meeting is being recorded.
Okay. Good morning, everybody. Great to see you all, everybody on Zoom and live in person. It's always very, very special to be here and be able to learn together live. Just going to put everybody on mute, but please feel free to unmute yourselves as you see fit. Okay. Okay, so we are continuing in the path of the just, and we're on page 228, and we are discussing Nikius. Of course, Nikius, as we know, is our attempt to work through and work out whatever wrinkles are left in our approach to our service of Hashem, and to try to kind of upgrade and bring it up to another level. And we've been dealing with Nikius as it relates to actions, focusing specifically on the actions that we all struggle with on a regular basis. We're going to wrap that up, and then he's going to get into a new category, an all new topic, still in the area of Nikius, but that is Nikius as it relates to our personal character traits, our midos, which is also a very relevant conversation that he's going to guide us through. Let's just finish up where we were. We're on 228 in the second paragraph. Having discussed many specific examples of Nikius with respect to sinful actions, Ramchal concludes his discussion of this aspect of the trait. So this is a bit of a summary of what we've been doing for the last many weeks. And he says like this: until here, I have discussed Nikius in regard to a few of the mitzvahs, focusing on those details in which we see that people generally stumble. He highlighted those areas which are common to all of us, things that are a challenge for everybody. But from these examples, we can derive how to apply the concept of Nikius to the rest of the Torah's prohibitions, meaning we only focused on certain things, but the idea is to take the concept of Nikius, which is really doing a deep dive into our observance of particular mitzvahs and in particular prohibitions, and apply it to all of the prohibitions. But there's no prohibition that does not have numerous offshoots and details, some of which are more severe and some of which are less severe. And one who desires to be a naki, that is, a naki is somebody who practices Nikius. Literally, naki means a clean person who's cleansed, who's gone through his actions and really purified them and cleansed them. So that person has to be a naki in regard to all of the prohibitions and pure in regard to all of them. Meaning we didn't focus on all of them. We highlighted a few and gave over the principle of Nikius and how it works. But the goal now would be to take it and go apply it to all of the prohibitions that we deal with. Because there's no such thing as a prohibition in the Torah which doesn't have tons and tons of details. Think about we focused on forbidden foods, we focused on Shabbos, we focused on honesty in business, but any prohibition that you can think of in the Torah, whatever it might be, especially when it comes to this, less relevant to us, but very relevant in Israel, but all the agricultural laws, the prohibitions against eating fruits until they've been tithed, and until depending upon which cycle of the which year it is in the 7-year cycle, it's going to make a big difference regarding what I have to do with my fruits and the tithing of the fruits. Many examples. We have a lemon tree in our backyard, which is such a beautiful thing to have, and we eat the lemons and we enjoy them. But this year was so complicated because last year was the Shemitah year. Last year was the sabbatical year. So all the lemons on the tree from the sabbatical year have to be treated with what's called Kedushat Shvi, the holiness of the seventh year. There's a whole bunch of laws that regulate how to deal with the lemons in the seventh year. Okay. The lemons from the eighth year, which is really not the eighth year, it's really the first year because the cycle starts over, has a whole different set of laws on how you're supposed to deal with them. That's all great if you know exactly which lemons on your tree are from the seventh year and which lemons on your tree are from the eighth year. But it's not like I went out in the backyard and tied a string around every lemon that was growing on my tree, a seventh year ribbon or an eighth year, ribbon. A lot of them I had no idea. So now what do? So there's a rabbi who specializes in, his specialty is not lemons, but fruit, in the agricultural cycle. And I spoke to him and I said, what do I do? So he told me exactly what to do. It's basically a big question mark, whether they're seventh year fruits or first year fruits. So you have to treat them with the stringencies of each as if it was the first seventh year. And so, I mean, these are, you don't just, in Israel, you don't just go in your backyard and pick your fruits. Everything has extreme, and these are Torah laws. These aren't just, nice rabbinical laws.
So your average grocery store in Israel, is it segregated for you or you don't know what's going on?
It's,
I mean,
we don't have segregated grocery stores in Israel, but depends which part of the no, there are, the hechshers do that for you, right? So if you walk into a supermarket, it's very important to read the hechsher. The hechsher will give you the exact details of, how it's observing and how they're dealing with the fruits and vegetables.
is there any food in Israel that's not hechsher?
Not hechshered at all.
Yeah,
Sure.
I mean, not like fruits and vegetables stuff, but I mean like canned stuff and things like that.
Oh yeah, tons.
Really?
Tons. I mean, don't forget you have all this imported stuff, and there's this store that Yosef loves. This store, it's like an Asian store across the street from the Shuk, and he goes in there. There's like almost nothing that has a hechsher in there. I mean, you can buy pork in Tel Aviv. That doesn't have a hechsher.
No?
Not yet.
Maybe I missed this, but what happens with no temple in Jerusalem? What happens to the whole tithing? We're following these Shemitah so carefully. What do we do with
So
tithing?
we do all the tithing, and then we carefully wrap up those fruits and double wrap them, and we dispose of them. Because we can't give them to a Kohen today because the Kohanim are not pure. They can't eat the tithes, right?
Right.
So all the
I've often suspected that.
but we have to, we have to treat it with all the stringencies, but then on the other end, you can't give it to a Kohen to eat. So we wrap them up and toss it.
Is there anybody in history that could be called a Naki?
Sure.
I mean, is there, like one or two guys he's a,
No, the great people of every generation are Nakim. But it's not something that, but it's important to point out with this book here, and I've said this many times, we are learning this book the wrong way. Completely not learning this book the way it's meant to be learned. It's not meant to be read and studied like a piece of text or some kind of, halachic text. It's a guidebook that's supposed to take you through your life. So you're really not supposed to move on to the next midah until you have first fully, totally mastered the midah that you're focusing on now. We obviously aren't going to learn it that way because it's not going to work. But we're trying to get the full picture. But and I've said this also before. There are many rabbis, great rabbis, who it's known that the Mesilas Yesharim never was always in their talis bag. It was with them everywhere they went. So every day after davening, they'd study a little bit more, or read a little bit more, learn a little bit more. It's meant to be studied throughout your whole life. And here he said, I just took a few examples and I applied Nikios just to a few examples to give you the concept of how it works. But really it applies to all the mitzvahs in the Torah. Okay. The sages of blessed memory have already stated in the Song of Songs, the Medrash for the Song of Songs, regarding the verse, your teeth are like a flock of ewes. Ewes? Never know how to pronounce that.
Use.
Use. Why are the warriors of Israel your teeth compared to the flock of ewes? For the following reason: just as a ewe is modest, i.e., its tail covers its private parts, so too were the warriors of Israel modest and principled during the war with Midian. They didn't succumb to the temptations of promiscuous Midianite women. Rav Huna said further in the name of Ravacha, we can infer that one of the warriors, that not one of the warriors ever put on his head tefillin before his arm tefillin. If one of them had ever put on his head tefillin first, Moshe would not have praised him and he would not have emerged from the war unscathed. I'll explain this in a minute. The sages similarly said in the Talmud Yerushalmi, one who speaks between the blessing of Yishtabach and the blessing of Yotzer Or during the Shachar's prayer has committed a sin. It's crazy that we're reading this right now. I'll tell you why in a minute. And he returns from the ranks of war on his account. So you have here an indication of how far true precision in Nikias in deeds must extend. Let me just explain to you what's going on over here. He's basically giving you two examples of what Nikias could look like. It's taking the mitzvah all the way to the end, right? I don't just daven, and I don't just daven the morning, the Psukei de Zimra, but I'm very careful with the Psukei de Zimra, not to talk between this part and this part. Or I don't just put on tefillin, but I put on tefillin the right way, the exact way, following all the details and all the specifics. I put in my arm before at my head, and then right? So these details are where the battle of Nikias is fought. Everybody can do mitzvahs in a general way. What separates the nucky from the non-nucky is the attention to the specifics and the details. The reason why it's very interesting is because, we are such a friendly group here. It's such a wonderful thing to be so friendly, right? So, for example, when Brad, we're using you as an example. When Brad finishes Psukei de Zimra, okay, before the next person takes over for Yishtabach, what happens? Everybody says, Shkoya Bradley, or great job, Bradley. Was so right. That's also so nice to be so friendly, but you can't speak during part of davening, right? So it's important to give them one of these or shake his head, but to speak at the places during davening where you're not supposed to speak it's a nucky level of approaching davening, but it's important. These are specifics that matter. The details of davening matter. Where you cannot speak, you have to be careful not to speak. If you're putting on your tefillin, you put on your arm tefillin, you can't speak between putting on your arm tefillin and your head tefillin. And that's a detail of tefillin that actually that matters. It's supposed to connect the arm to the head, and that's part of the whole process. So the details really make a difference in all the areas of halacha and Jewish law. Okay, now that everybody is completely lost, we'll go on.
Can I ask you a question?
Yes.
Like you just said,
Yes, you may.
tell me what that means, that it makes a difference. I know it's God's law, and that's the primary reason we do these things. But you must have built some opinions yourself to kind of tie it all together. Why are we so tasked with refining and doing the best we can down to the smallest
Okay,
detail?
it's a great question. That's a great question. I'm glad you asked that. So I think it's important to take a step back and understand what halacha is, right? When we think about Jewish law in its detail, what is it? Is it a list of things that God sent down into the world that we have to follow, maybe not for any real specific reason other than God said so? Is it a kind of a random list of do's and don'ts that don't make sense to us or aren't supposed to make sense to us, but we do them because tradition? Like what is halacha? So the best way that I can explain it is halacha is the science of the non-physical world. It's science. It's a very, very precise science. Just like in any area of science, chemistry, physics, the details make a tremendous difference, right? If you know, what's the difference really? CO2, CO3, I don't know if there's such a thing as CO3, but the detail,
CO and CO2.
CO2, right?
There's a big
What's the difference?
there.
The huge difference. I mean, it's almost a CO2. What different? These little tiny details in science make all the difference in the world. A little mistake or a little variation in your scientific experiment can have devastating and destructive results. Okay, or just simply not produce the desired results. So when we think of halacha, we have to think of it as a science of the non-physical world, the science of the metaphysical world, if you will. And just like in the science of the physical world, the science of the metaphysical world or the non-physical world, the details make a tremendous difference. Every single little detail is part of creating the desired result of whatever mitzvah that you're doing. So if you're putting on tefillin, whatever the desired outcome is connecting our minds and our hearts and everything to Hashem, the details are going to make a tremendous difference. So let's say, for example, putting on your arm tefillin and putting on your head tefillin without an interruption in between, that little particular detail of the law is going to make a big difference in the effect, the desired effect or outcome that the process of putting tefillin makes. Another example with tefillin, just because we're talking about it, is if you have it in the right place, then whatever tefillin is doing, all of the connections and all the spiritual highway, the pathway of spirituality that's passing up and down, it's all happening. If your tefillin's a little bit in the wrong place and the intent is not where it's exactly supposed to be, then none of that is happening. So you can say, oh, come on, Rabbi, I put on tefillin. Does it really matter if it's here or if it's here? And the answer is, does it really matter, CO2 or CO? Yes, it matters. Those little details actually matter quite a bit, and that's true in the laws of Shabbos, and it's true in the laws of kosher, and it's true in the laws of prayer, and it's true in all areas of Jewish law. Yeah. We have two questions. I'll come, one second, Jimmy. Yeah, go ahead.
Did the sages come up with this through study, or was there something innate in their something revealed that allowed them to know what the formula would be?
In any particular mitzvah you're talking
Yeah,
about?
like
So-
for you can use it for whatever.
Good question. I mean,
The
that's a
rabbinical,
big, that's a very big question that really gets to the topic of oral law and how oral law works. But the general answer to that question is that all of the details of how we do what we do is transmitted through the oral Torah, right? So for example, what does the Torah say about tefillin? It just says put phylacteries between your eyes and tie them on your arm. Like, does that tell you anything? Does that give you any idea what the mitzvah of tefillin is? That's all it says.
It tells you how to do the physical act, but it doesn't.
But you don't know what they are. You don't know what they look like.
And
You don't know
you
what's
don't know to what
inside of them.
purpose.
You don't know what they're made of. You don't know the proportions, the sizes, the materials. You don't know where they go. You don't know anything. You just know them. There are these things called tefillin, which I have no idea what they are because the Torah doesn't tell us what they are. And I'm supposed to put one between my eyes and one on my arm. That's all I know. So it's the oral Torah, which was transmitted orally until it was written down in the form of the Mishnah, which gives us all the details. All the details. Jeffrey.
For those of us who are not nookies,
Oh, come on. I thought we were all nuckies over here.
we get credit for trying.
Of course.
Nucky.
Of course. We all.
I like
Ev-
the look. I like the
Nuckies. We're all, it's always, this is always, everything in Judaism is about the effort. I've said this since day one, and it's as true today as it was 20 years ago. Judaism is never all or nothing, right? It's always about, and the Ramchal says this many times, and he says, according to the effort that one puts in, the results, the reward, the results and the results take place. So, so for sure, it's about, we're doing the best we can, but we also, as Jews, have to also have a mindset. You have to have, at the same time, you have to have contradictory mindset. One mindset should be, wow, look how far I've come. 5 years ago, I was here, now I'm here. Look what I'm doing today versus what I was doing a year ago, 2 years ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago. Look how much I've progressed. Look how much more committed I am and serious I am and dedicated I am to the mitzvahs and trying to do them and doing them right. And that's one mindset that you always have to have. At the same time, you have to also have the opposite mindset, which is there's so many things that I'm not yet doing or not doing right or need to improve on or need to work on. So that throughout our lives, we're constantly trying to upgrade. One thing that we should avoid is plateauing and stagnating in our religious growth and our commitment to the mitzvahs, because it's a lifelong process that we need to just always try to be working on and getting better at, and very small steps, picking specific areas where we're trying to focus on. But that's something that we need to take into consideration.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
I was actually kind of interested in the larger scheme of things that, let me make a statement and tell me whether or not this is a legitimate way of looking at things. If God is the infinite giver, and the purpose of mankind is to fill his will, fill the world with his will, would it be accurate to say that following in great detail all of his laws impact the individual in terms of the experience of what life can bring to an individual? Joy, happiness, whatever, those are all trivial comments, they're not broad enough. But does it make sense to say that we're in this ultimately because of we want to exploit the full extent of what we are capable of knowing in our relationship to God and our experience of life?
100%. That's 100% true.
100%.
100% true. If there was more than 100%, it'd be more than 100% true. It's exactly what it is, because it's all about the mitzvahs, when done correctly and with an attention to detail, opens up a deeper connection between my neshama and Hashem's infinite existence, which means that I'm able then to tap into, to a greater degree, the infinite qualities of Hashem and sort of download them and incorporate them into my own life. So that's going to have an impact on every area of my life in its entirety. And that's why the details really do matter, because the details, if you think about it as being some sort of, complicated system of like some sort of combination lock or something where you have to align everything up just the right way. But once you have it all aligned the right way, because you've put all the details into place, then that flow of elokus, that flow of divine quality, whatever that is able to flow unobstructed into my reality. And then I'm able to have a better perception of Hashem and to see more clearly Hashem in everything that I do. And that opens up to the joy and all the things in my life that are.
One final thing to marry up to that whole thing. Does that mean that it is legitimate in our struggle to connect and to find logic to explain these, with the understanding that most of it we can't ultimately know, but is it legitimate to attempt to aspire to try to find the rationale, like for the arm and the head and tefillin and things of that nature?
Yes. I think what Les is touching on over here is, to what degree should we, as human beings who are clearly finite and limited in our understanding, to what degree should we attempt to understand the philosophical rationale underpinning of what the mitzvahs are? Because on one hand, they're from Hashem, so how could we ever know? How could we ever even have enough chutzpah to think that we'd have some idea of how these things work? Why is it when I eat matzah, something magical happens? When I sit in a sukkah, when I put up a mezuzah, right? So on one hand, you could say, like, it's silly to even try to think about what those things mean. And yet we see all of the great philosophers and Jewish thinkers throughout the ages, from the Rambam to the Sefer Chinuch, all the way down to Rav Hirsch and Rabbi Sachs, have spent a great deal of time trying to understand what the meaning of the mitzvahs are, because we do gain a deeper connection to everything we do when we have some way of understanding what it all means. But you have to do so with the humility of realizing that you might not be right, you probably aren't, but
Beautiful.
yeah. Okay, Michael had a question. You're good? Okay.
It's ironic that the details help you grow in your relationship. But it's also the details that scare 95% of the Jews away from becoming religious. And
Right.
I mean, from learning, if you, there's no reason to give examples, but if you tell someone, yeah, but you're supposed to do this and then this, they go, what does it matter? So there are roadblocks to beginning to grow. And I was wondering if there's ever been a sefer that is delineates how to start the journey, and as opposed to this sefer, which is how to finish the journey.
Well, there is no how to start the journey, because that's different for every person, where to start, how to start. I mean, the rules are pick the low-hanging fruit, start where things that are interesting to you, start where it's easy. There are general rules, but it's going to be different for everybody depending on where they are and what their interests are. But there are enough mitzvahs, there are enough areas of Jewish life that everybody can find something that they relate to. Some people love Shabbos, some people can't stand Shabbos. Some people love the holidays, some people don't want to deal with the holidays. So start with the things that you're interested in. Is a good way to start. And yeah, the details can be a barrier to people, but it's only because they don't understand what mitzvahs are. And they don't understand what Jewish law is. They think it's just, like any other religion that has a bunch of laws, okay, does it really matter so much this way, that way, but when it comes to Judaism, it does, because it's a divine system of how to allow your soul to connect to God. And that's a metaphysical reality that is defined by the details of the oral law. Yeah, Larry.
You started out with like a chemical formula, and if you do something wrong, you get pretty much immediate feedback that something isn't working.
Yeah,
But with the spiritual laws, you get immediate
That's a
feedback.
great-
How do you know?
that's a great point, and one of the things that makes it particularly challenging is that you don't get immediate feedback. You might not get any feedback, or it's very likely that if you're doing something wrong, you're not going to know, and that makes it a lot harder, right? If in the physical world, if you do something wrong, if you connect two wires that aren't supposed to be connected, you'll find out right away, but in the spiritual world, it doesn't work that way. And that's why there's a component of what's called emunah. Emunah is a belief or a faith or a confidence that one has to come to through their own journey, to the point where they actually accept and believe and are committed to the idea that halacha is God's metaphysical reality. And whether we understand it or not, or whether we see immediate results or not, we most likely won't, but it's still creating this reality, whether I see it or not. And that's ultimately what emunah is. That's what we call faith, because you're not going to get the immediate feedback. And that's what makes it challenging. And that's where, if you got immediate feedback, then to a certain degree, the free will component is taken away, right? The reason why, you don't open the window and jump out, because it would be a lot quicker if you parked right down there and you could just jump out the window instead of having to go all the way around this, And the reason for that is because if you do that, you're going to at least break some legs and break a couple legs, and probably much worse, because in the physical world, what the immediate results are of your actions. So you're not going to do it. But in the spiritual world, it's not that clear. So the free will is there, and you have to decide whether you're going to, Susie.
But we all know that there's hashgacha pratis, and that maybe not at the moment, you don't know. But when you look back on your life, you can definitely see, if you look for them, you can see the connections of why God put you here and why you did this and why you made this choice. And there's a red thread and you can find it if you look for it. So it's not impossible to see the hand of God in your life. It just may not be at that moment.
Yeah, that's a great point. That's a very good point. Looking back, a lot of times you can understand why this happened, and you can see how Hashem literally saved you from this terrible thing that could have happened if you had made that decision. But A, you have to be looking for that. B, like you said, you don't see it in real time. You usually see it in hindsight, and even then you can't always see it.
And just,
I was just gonna dovetail on that, by saying that, the Torah tells us first we do and then we know. In this group, I think we could all say that our Muna has grown because of what we do, what we're doing.
Yeah, that's an important thing, right? Sometimes, sometimes you just have to jump in, even when it's not clear and doesn't make sense. There's a lot of things that hold us back, and applying my rational thought, this doesn't make sense. But you can get stuck in that place of indifference or indecision, and trying to rationally understand something before I do it for so long that your lifetime can pass and you never did it. Or you can say, I'm just going to start doing it. And I'm sure that once I start doing it, it'll start to make sense, and I'll see, and I'll understand. We don't function in our lives. In general, we don't function in our lives where I'm not going to do something until I fully understand. I just flew on a big, huge piece of metal flying through the sky at, on 40,000, 30,000 feet in the air. And you think I have any idea how an airplane works? I have no idea whatsoever how an airplane works. If I waited until I fully understood, aeronautics and everything and what goes into making an airplane work.
still be in the neighborhood of Tel Aviv.
Exactly. I would have gotten on the plane. So in our lives, we do things, even though we don't fully understand it, because that's how life works. So sometimes it's that way too. In Judaism, we can't, as Elijah the prophet said, to the Jewish people when they were, trying to decide whether they wanted to follow the prophets of Baal or they wanted to follow Hashem. He said, how long are you going to sit on the fence for? How long do you want to sit on the fence for? At a certain point, you have to make a decision and just go for it, and see where it leads you.
With the understanding that there's always uncertainty. Just to
Yeah.
put a cap on this, tell me whether or not I'm wrong here. Because we have the capacity to understand some of these spiritual things, even if it's very elementary, it also therefore implies that we have an obligation to struggle to attempt to find that significance, with the understanding that more often than not, we won't come up with a definitive answer. And I'm saying this for a reason. I'll share it sometime. But is that, this is,
That's it. Exactly right. And like you said, we may not ultimately understand it, but doesn't exempt us from trying to do what we can to understand.
let me say this though. One of the things that has allowed me to do is to identify resources like yourself and be swayed by the strength of your commitment, even though I don't understand how you got from one spot to another. There is enough that I've observed where I've seen you operate, where I have that confidence. So I'm prepared.
Don't watch too closely, Les. Don't watch too closely. But what you're
Well,
describing.
just because you're directing it yourself doesn't mean it's not motion one.
What you're describing is something that we all do. We all have our people that we look up to, and we watch them and we hold on to them, and they pull us along. Reminds me of a great story that during the Holocaust, there was one of the great giants of the Hasidic world who survived the Holocaust against all odds. He was in camps and work camps and everything imaginable. He was known as the Bluzhover Rabbi because he was from Bluzhov. there was a story about the Bluzhever Rebbe. There are a lot of stories about the Bluzhever Rebbe during the Holocaust. One of the stories was that there was I think it was a death march, and the Nazis had this seditious game of making this prisoners jump over a ditch that had bodies in it, and it was basically impossible. The distance between one edge and the other edge was too far. Even a healthy, athletic person to jump, let alone somebody who'd been in prison for years in prison camp. And they got to this point, and there was Bluzhever Rebbe, and there was another person there, and the Nazis made them jump. And they closed their eyes, and the Rebbe said, "Close your eyes," and he said, "Let's go," and he said, "Jump," and they opened their eyes, and they were on the other edge, on the other side of this pit, and this chassid, the disciple, this person that was with him, said, "Rebbe, what did you do? How did you do that? How did you jump across this chasm that was so large?" He said, "I closed my eyes, and I pictured Abraham and Sarah, and I pictured Yitzchak and Rivka, and I pictured my grandparents and my parents and all the generations that came before us, and I held on to them and I grabbed onto them, and they pulled me across." But then the Rebbe said to this, "But how did you do it?" He said, "That's how I did it. But how did you do it?" And he said, "I was holding on to you. You pulled me across." So that's how we in Judaism, we have to do that. We have to grab on to somebody who's going to help us fly ahead and move across. We all have our inspiring, and they don't have to be people that are living. They can be people that, Rashi. Once one of my Rebbes he said, "My Rebbe is Rashi." That's my Rebbe. The Rashi and the Maharal, those are my two Rebbes. Yes.
The name of
The rabbi, he was known as the Bluzhever Rebbe. Bluzhever. Don't ask me to
I
spell
heard
that.
that story years ago.
Yeah?
And I actually used it in one of my conversations.
Really?
Yeah.
Was it an appeal?
What?
It was
Yeah,
an appeal?
Did it work? Did it work well? Was it a good appeal?
It was a good appeal because people were remembered that story.
Yeah. Yeah.
It was about, going on the backs of our ancestors so that our future generations come.
Yeah.
And people did remember that story, but I didn't know the name.
Yeah, it's a powerful story. Okay. Good. Finish on 231?
No.
Huh? Oh no, sorry, 230. Sorry,
Right.
230. Yeah. Okay, so now let's make a little start on this. So now we're shifting gears. Now we're taking the concept of Nikius that we've been applying to strictly and specifically to mitzvos, working to really get down to the detailed level of our commitment to the mitzvahs. And we're going to take the same principle of Nikius and apply it to midos, character traits. And what he's going to do is he's going to specifically focus on a few of them. Haughtiness. That's going to be the one that we're going to focus on today, and others. So he says like this. By the way, we will have class next week, but it might be exclusively on Zoom. I'll let everybody know, but we will have class next week. Okay, having completed his discussion of Nikius in one's actions with respect to both sins resulting from temptation and sins resulting from human interactions, Ramchal devotes the final section of this chapter, which is still quite long, to Nikius in character traits. And here's the idea. Just as one requires Nikius in his actions, so does one require Nikius in his character traits, his midos. One can almost say that it is more difficult to attain Nikius in character traits than to attain it in actions. For human nature affects character traits more than it affects actions. It's a very powerful statement. I just want to read that in Hebrew. Kimat sheyoser kashahu hanekiyos b'midos mashu b'maasim ki hateva poel b'midos yoser mima shu poel maasim. Our nature, our inner nature, you know, we all have so much in that's just inborn. And then when you add on to that, you know, Allie's studying doing a lot of studying now to get her degree in counseling, clinical counseling. And she's telling about all these things that she's learning about how deeply, deeply affected we are as human beings by the things that happen to us, you know, in those early years that we don't even remember. You know, all these things about attachment and detachment and so much of who we are is so baked into who we are, wired into who we are, both from our you know, natural teva, who the things that are just kind of who we are naturally, and the experiences that we had in our early years, and so much of that is so hard to change. So hard to change. I mean, I honestly don't even know how
Don't use any examples, okay?
that reminds me of something that happened when I was a kid. But I honestly don't even know, like, I don't want to say this to her, but like, I don't even really see how therapy can even really undo some of these things that are just so much a part of who we are. Like, it's so hard for people to change. You can change what you do. You can change your actions much more easily than you can change who you are. Midos are about who we are.
Essence.
It's our essence. It's how we think of it's the lens that we see the world through. It's how we understand ourselves. It's how we understand our relationship to the world. It's how we understand everything around us is so deeply affected by experiences that we've had, or experiences, I mean, the generational trauma that you see in families where it's just becomes almost impossible to break through that, is because of it's that has such an impact on our character traits that it's much easier to change what we do than it is to change who we are. Yeah, Susan.
I think that there's something very wise about what you're saying, but I think even if a person can't change those deep inner feelings and understandings, they can understand where they came from. So I think that's part of the purpose of therapy, is understanding yourself. Even if some of those deep-seated things you can't change, it gives you an explanation, it gives you insight into
You could be
who you
kinder
are.
to yourself because you understand where they're
You
coming
can
from.
do a lot of things
Yeah,
differently if you
that's true.
understand.
That's true. No, for sure, that's true. That's definitely true. And there are, by the way, Allie's very interested in these different modalities that, you know, that bypass like talk therapy and goes sort of deeper into like the wiring of you know, can rewire a person's brain. She's not into this, but a lot of people are very into this, like psychedelic therapies now, because that whole world of psychedelic therapy, whether it's ketamine or whatever they're using for psychedelic, seems to have this ability to bypass all of the cognitive stuff and go right into sort of rewiring who a person is in their essence.
That's a theory.
Yeah, it's definitely a theory. And there's a lot of, I mean, I'm not, you know, when I hear this, I'm like, yeah, right, okay.
There are also
But
risks to
there
that
are
as well.
tremendous risks, but there's a lot of stuff that's been written and a lot of case studies that have shown, you know, people who have suffered from depression for their whole lives, who, you know, are now doing psychedelic therapy, whether it's mushrooms or ketamine, whatever, and for the first time in their lives, they're much happier. Maybe that's because they're tripping or whatever. But whatever. Not to get into psychedelic therapy, but the idea is that midos are very, very, very hard to change.
And it also is associated with the concept that to build a new narrative that becomes a part of your essence, You have to deconstruct what you currently have. And that is the most threatening experience there is, because you have to give up something before there's any assurance that it's going to be replaced with something that'll
Mhm.
maintain your sense of stability.
Wow, that's a great point.
Actually, I think every Jewish holiday has a component that's built around deconstruction, which opens up space for us to fill it with some renewed understanding of what we want and who we are.
Yeah, I've heard you say that before, and I think it's very true.
One positive aspect of what you were saying though is going back, you could go back several generations of someone that's secular for generations, and you could still see the Pindala Yid in that person. And where does that come from? There's
Yeah.
something that's innate in that in those generations that
sure.
you can't understand.
Michael.
Why do we think he says one can almost say that's more difficult?
Let me see if he actually says that. He actually does kind of say that. Kaksarach Nikias Bamidos, the Kimat Sheyoser Kashahu. It's a hard word to translate, but Kimat is like it's almost. Kimat is almost. Kimat Sheyoser. It's almost that it's harder. He is saying that. Good question, because based on what we're saying now, it's definitely harder. Kimat Sheyoser Kashahu Nikias Bamidos Mashahu Amasim. It's a good question.
Well,
Hey, wait a minute. Oh, this is chapter 11. Remember what the Vilna Gaon said? There wasn't a superfluous word in the first 10 chapters of the Mesilas Yesharim. Maybe this is the one.
Yeah, baby.
That is what he said. That is what the Vilna Gaon
Yeah.
said. Not a superfluous word in the first
He might
10
have been talking
chapters
about
of the
this
Vilna
word.
Gaon and of the Mesilas Yesharim. I don't know. It's a good question.
And you found the word. You are incredible.
here's one way to look at that, though. The energy that you need, the motivation to be able to give up something, to be able to build something new, can be stimulated probably most dramatically by a sense of crisis. It's where we've been doing some learning with Gadi, very much into the emotional kind of pathway to stimulate growth. So that under certain circumstances where we have lost all control and we realize that, and there is a crisis, that can be a kind of super octane fuel that allows us to kind of jump over the intervening.
Is that sort of like a rock bottom situation? Is that what you mean by that? Like
Please refer to it that way.
when a person hits a level where like they just can't, they have to change or they're just not gonna, they're not gonna be able to carry on. That's usually oftentimes the impetus for lots of growth is a rock bottom. It's very hard to make a real change unless you somehow in your mind hit a rock bottom, like, okay, I can't do this anymore. I've got to make this change in my life.
But the pain is too
The
great.
pain is too great and I have to make this change. And if I don't, like I have a friend who had a drug addiction and, his whole world was falling apart and he was squandering all of his money and he was losing he got divorced, he lost his relationship with his child, with his son, and it was just getting worse and worse and worse. And he kept going in this horrible direction until he finally got arrested. And he said when he heard that door, the jail cell, the door of the jail cell slammed shut, he said that was his rock bottom moment. And that moment, his whole life turned around. He never touched drugs again. And he did I don't know how long he was in jail for. He didn't tell him, but he turned his whole life around. Now he's like totally hardcore religious guy, Balchula, studies Torah all day long, but you almost have to hit that rock bottom moment to find the strength to like propel you towards.
David,
Yeah.
without getting specific, Gotti has demonstrated the success of that working at that point and has, Baruch Hashem, transformed someone that some of us know from that point to a much healthier point right before our eyes.
Yeah.
It can be done.
Yeah.
He's done it.
Okay, great. Amazing. Okay, so let's just finish this paragraph. So as we said, and we don't know why it says almost, but it does. You can almost say that it's more difficult to attain the cues and character traits than to attain it in actions. For human nature, it affects character traits more than it affects actions, right? Your actions can be untrue to your essence, but it's very hard for your midos to be untrue to your essence. Since a person's makeup and disposition are either great facilitators or great hindrances to the specific character traits, which means that in order to perfect one's traits, he must often battle his natural inclination. And any battle that is waged against one's natural inclination is bound to be a fierce battle. This is the idea that the sages of blessed memory expressed with their statement, Ezehu Gibor Hakovesh Etzitzro, famous comment in Pirkei Avos, who is the truly strong person, the one who is able to conquer his own Yetzer Hara. If you want to change, if a person wants to change, they have to, the will to change has to be stronger than the will to stay the same. Right? And if you want to try to put a battle of wills, if a person wants to stop smoking, stop drinking, stop overeating, whatever, but there's a huge part of them that wants to keep overeating, keep drinking, and keep smoking, and they're trying to pit the two wills against each other, then the will, the Yetzer Hara, the Yetzer Hara will almost always in the end overcome. What you have to do is you have to change your will. Your will to make the change has to become somehow stronger inside of you. And that's where the rock bottom effect comes in.
Thing that I think is really interesting about what you just said was, it seems like the Yetzer Hara would have a much greater effect on your actions than your midos.
Okay, why is that?
Just because he puts those forbidden fruits or actions in front of you that you, even without thinking, start doing or contemplate about it. But because your midos are so ingrained in you, is the Yetzer Hara really going to change your midos? But he's really going to affect your actions. I was just thinking about it. You know, the Yetzer Hara is always
Well, that could help understand the question about almost, because maybe yeah, I hear both sides. I do. I hear both sides. It's hard to know. But I think that at least with I think maybe I'm wrong. My personal feeling is that when it comes to actions, there is more of a moment of conscious choice where I'm deciding whether to or whether not to than when it comes to my midos. My midos are more,
They're unseen, they're behind the scenes.
but they're also more automatic. I don't, ideally, the reason why they're called midos is because midos means measurements, right? I'm supposed to have at my disposal almost like a touch screen where I can say, okay, now I want to apply the measure of anger. I'll turn up the volume a little bit on this particular meter, turn it up a little bit and activate it, right? Or humility, now this situation calls for 37.9 humility, so I've got to move it up to 37.9 and activate it. That's why they're called midos, because ideally my midos I should be in total control over, and to decide how and when to use every character trait that exists that's at our disposal. But I think that when it comes to midos, we give very little thought to we say that's just who I am. I'm a jealous person. I'm an angry person. I'm a lazy person, or whatever. I can be a lazy person.
They're involuntary.
They're involuntary. They feel involuntary.
It's a lot easier not to hit the guy in the face than it is to not be mad at him.
Right, exactly. So I think that's why changing the meetups can be harder. Because they're, yeah, that reason. Okay, I think this is a good
That's what
place to.
Musar is all about.
That's exactly what Musar is all about. That's exactly Musar. Musar is all about changing those meetups. Let's,
And by focusing on behavior with the intention, the consistency of behavior can ultimately impact the kind of the essence of who you are, that's one way of doing it.
yeah. By the way, just wanted to give you a little bit of a heads up. He
Fake
says
it till you
he's,
make it.
he's gonna fake the make. There's 4 areas where he's gonna focus on. 4 areas where he's gonna demonstrate for us how to apply Nikios to Midos, and it's haughtiness, anger, envy, and desire. Not that, I mean, those are things that none of us obviously struggle with on any level, but so he's gonna apply to those 4 areas. We'll see. And then we'll have an understanding from there how to apply in general, how to apply Nikios to Midos. Okay.
So that's where you're gonna examine the whole dynamic of public bloggings.
We're gonna demonstrate it. If we do it live next week, we'll demonstrate one. Well, I'll need a volunteer. I'll need a volunteer.
I could always use.
Okay. All right, everybody. Thank you guys on Zoom. And I'm gonna end the conversation over here. Okay, have a good one, everybody.
It's Musar